Welcome back to UNESCAP workshop on Trade Agreement Text Analysis Tool. My name is Maria Semenova and this is Module 3. By now, I hope that you have already grasped how the Trade Agreement Text Analysis Tool works and what kind of dataset can be generated with it. And I hope that you already were able to find it helpful. The last topic remaining in this course is the third mapping option, two-tier categorized mapping. It encompasses the main features of the one-tier categorized mapping option, but takes us a bit further. Additionally, it incorporates a chapter title mapping feature that was requested by some of the users of the tool. Let's dive into it. Similarly to the one-tier categorized mapping that we reviewed in Module 2, this mapping option also allows to map multiple categorized provision types or topics addressed in articles of trade agreements. The difference is that each topic or provision type is to be coded with two sets of keyword combinations, Tier 1 and Tier 2. Tier 1 keyword combinations are used as the initial filter that is applied either to article plus text combinations or to chapter titles. And Tier 2 keyword combinations are then only searched for in those articles that were positively flagged by Tier 1 keyword combinations. What are the potential benefits of this approach? First, you can focus your mapping only on a narrower set of relevant articles. For example, you can focus your mapping on the articles present only in those chapters that are specifically dedicated to the issues of interest. Or you can attempt a more nuanced mapping of provision types, and later in the module we will see examples of what is meant by that. Setting up for this mapping option is very similar to what we did in Module 2. First, you can customize it by selecting whether you are going to supplement your keyword combinations with regular expressions or placeholders, and the latter is a pre-selected default option. Secondly, you can adjust the maximum number of words allowed in place of ampersand placeholder. The preset default is 8, but again, you can make a selection between 1 and 10. And then you download the matching matrix template. It is different from the one that we already worked with. You will fill it with two sets of keyword combinations for each corresponding topic or provision type. And you have also an option to provide groupings into broader thematic areas. Having filled the matching matrix, you save it as an Excel file, and then you upload it into the tool, hit refresh button to see the matrix within the tool. In the next step, you can choose whether Tier 1 keyword combination set should be applied to article, title plus text combinations, or to chapter titles. We will review these two options in more detail later in this module. So having done that, you will press Run button to launch the algorithm for the selected set of trade agreements. And as you should know by now, you can select trade agreements to analyze as the first step working with this text analysis tool, or after you set up the mapping option. The matching matrix for this mapping option naturally has a different structure, and you can see it now on this slide. It has 5 columns. There is a column titled Provision, where you consecutively include the topics or provision types that you want to map. And then there are 2 columns for each topic, where you can include 2 sets of keyword combinations, Tier 1 and Tier 2. And in the column over here, if you would like, you can provide labels for broader thematic areas which encompass a few narrow topics or provision types that you plan to map. And as before, this first column contains unique row ID numbers for each of the rows that you fill. Starting from the following slide, we will be talking about setting up specifically for the mapping option where Tier 1 keyword combinations are applied to article, title plus text combinations, which is the default option of the two-tier categorized mapping. So on the slide here, we see the guidelines for filling in the matching matrix when Tier 1 is applied to article, title plus text combinations. Please remember that the template of this matching matrix can be downloaded from the tool. Matching matrix may contain any number of rows coding any number of topics or provision types. Each topic or provision type must have two sets of keyword combinations associated with it. Each set of Tier 1 and Tier 2 keyword combinations may have any number of items separated with semicolons. Keyword combinations may contain placeholders or regular expressions. All rows containing topics and keyword combinations must be assigned their own ID numbers in column M. No empty rows should have an ID number assigned to it in column M. If there is no need to categorize broader thematic areas, then you can leave this column empty or assign one thematic area to all rows. And very importantly, a matching matrix, once completed, must be saved as an Excel file. There are some additional guidelines that you should consider when devising your matching matrix for this type of mapping. Preferably, Tier 1 should contain keyword combinations that are more specific to the topic to be mapped. For example, if we want to map provisions targeting trade in digital goods, we probably would code a Tier 1 set containing such keyword combinations as digital product or digital good. These are very specific to the topic that we are going to map. Tier 2 keyword combinations can be less specific to the targeted topic. The idea is that this set of keyword combinations is used to potentially clarify the type of regulation that is applied in relation to the targeted topic. For example, if an article that already contains reference to digital products or digital goods also contains Tier 2 keyword combinations describing non-discriminatory treatment or non-application of import duties, that would potentially indicate that the article likely contains provisions on non-discriminatory treatment of digital goods and on non-application of duties on importation of digital goods. But let me now show you an example of such matching matrix. Here I am showing you a rather large matching matrix. It is coding for 60 provision types that are relevant to regulating digital trade, and those provision types are organized into broader thematic areas. As you can see, those are highlighted by color. And then each of the provision types are coded by two sets of keyword combinations. Here is our more specific sets, and here are the sets with keyword combinations that intend to confirm what that provision is likely about. We will try now to run a query with a matching matrix of this kind, but for that I will use an abridged version of this matching matrix, so the mapping process takes less time. But before we run the query, let's consider what the algorithm does once you upload this type of a matching matrix. Select Tier 1 to be applied to a combination of article text and title, and then hit Run. The algorithm first extracts title and text of a given article, preprocesses it, and checks it for presence of one or more Tier 1 keyword combinations from a given row of the matching matrix. If one or more Tier 1 keyword combinations from a given row of the matching matrix are detected in a given article, then that article is checked also for presence of one or more Tier 2 keyword combinations from the same row of the matching matrix. If a given article is found to contain at least one keyword combination from both Tier 1 and Tier 2 sets, then that article is assigned the corresponding labels for provision type or broader thematic areas. If a given article is found to contain at least one keyword combination from Tier 1 set only, then that article is assigned Other for provision type and the corresponding label for thematic area. It means that this article still likely contains something relevant to the topic that you are trying to map, but the provision type is not determined. Later, when you review the mapping results, you can specifically see what articles were flagged as Other and decide if you can adjust the matching matrix in some way. If a given article is found to contain no Tier 1 keyword combinations, that article is not assigned the corresponding label for provision type and thematic area. Essentially, a given article is checked against all rows of the matching matrix. Having done that, the algorithm then extracts title plus text of the following article and proceeds to check it against all the rows of the matching matrix. As was discussed in Module 2, in the mapping results dataset, one article may appear more than once if it is found to address more than one coded topic or provision type. But now let's set up for the two-tier categorized mapping and run our query. So we are back to our tool. First, let's make selection of trade agreement that we want to analyze. I'm selecting trade agreement signed in any year from 2018 to 2020, and I'm selecting two participating economies to these trade agreements. So now we have all of the trade agreements signed within the selected time period to which Chile or Japan are parties. Then we go to the next module of the tool and we select two-tier categorized mapping option. We will keep the selection for using flexibility placeholders. We will leave this item here unchanged as well. As you remember, here you can download the template of the matching matrix that you can fill out. As I mentioned, we have a matching matrix that was prepared in advance, which is an abridged version of the matching matrix coding for provisions relevant to regulating digital trade. So I loaded that abridged version and let me show you what it has. I only kept 3 rows from that matching matrix, the first 3 rows that code for provisions related to application of customs duties on trade in digital goods, also provision on non-discriminatory treatment of digital products, and provision on government support to trade in digital products. And in this case, we are selecting for the Tier 1 keyword combinations to be applied to a combination of article, title, and text, which is a default option. And we press Run. So now we are taken to the module where we can review the mapping results. As you remember, the results are organized in groups of articles from each of the trade agreements that was analyzed. And we have the article text, as well as article name and number and chapter name and number. We have our labels for provision types and thematic areas. And we have 2 columns here where we would have sections of text extracted from the article that matched Tier 1 or Tier 2 keyword combinations. And as you remember, if only Tier 1 keyword combinations are present in the article, while tier 2 keyword combinations are not, then that article is assigned labels other for provision type and for thematic area. So we can quickly review our results now. So as you remember from the matching matrix, we tried to map 3 types of provisions. And let's take a look at some of the provisions that we were able to detect. Here are a few examples of provisions that are related to application of customs duties on digital goods. And digital goods are sometimes called electronic transmissions or content transmitted electronically, and we coded all of those options into the tier 1 keyword combinations. While tier 2 keyword combinations have words that are related to application of customs duties, internal taxes, fees, and other charges. Now let's take a look at a few provisions that are related to non-discriminatory treatment of digital products. So for example, here we have a few provisions like that. For example, here, no party shall accord less favorable treatment to digital products created, produced, published, and so on in the territory of another party, and so on. So as you can see in our tier 1, again, we coded for different ways to name digital products, and some of them were detected in the article text. And tier 2 keyword combinations contain phrases that describe regulations on non-discriminatory treatment of digital products. And again, here we can see right away the third type of provisions that we try to detect, provisions on government support to trade in digital products. And here we have, again, in the first tier, keyword combinations coding for presence of phrases naming digital products. And then in tier 2 combinations, we have phrases describing regulations on subsidies or grants provided by the government. And indeed, we can find those tier 2 keyword combinations within the article text. On this slide, you can see a few more examples of provisions that I was able to detect using the full version of the matching matrix, coding provisions related to regulation of digital trade. And here you have provision on automation of customs procedures, electronic exchange of trade-related documents, private sector self-regulation in e-commerce, and online consumer protection. And as you can see, the blue highlight show us the tier 1 keyword combinations that were detected in those articles, while green highlight shows us the tier 2 keyword combinations that were detected in the same articles. So having reviewed the mapping results, in the tool we can download the per article mapping results with treaty metadata. Let's do it now. As you remember, we press this plus sign and go to the first download option. So this is our dataset with mapping results. Let's quickly zoom in. And its structure is already, I'm sure, is quite familiar to you. We have trade agreement titles, text of the articles, and other data associated with each of the article. And then we have over here the labels for the provision type and thematic areas. Let's now choose only those articles that were found to contain relevant provisions. And as you can see, some articles have a provision label associated with it, while some other articles only have other label. Those articles that have a provision label have both tier 1 and tier 2 keyword combinations present, while other articles that have other label associated with them only have tier 1 keyword combinations detected. And for tier 1 and tier 2 separately, we have two columns. The first columns in each set contain sections of article text extracted from those articles. And these sections are the ones that were matching the keyword combinations that we provided in the matching matrix. And the second columns in each set contain the actual keyword combinations that we included into the matching matrix and that ended up detecting the sections of text that matched them. And again, looking at the sections of text extracted from the article text, we can have our initial idea on whether the match was accurate. In those cases where those sections of text are not particularly conclusive, you can always return to the column with the article text and take a closer look at that to make sure that the match was accurate. And if not, you can always go back to the matching matrix that you created and see if you need to make any revisions to it to improve the performance of the algorithm. And then, as you remember, on the right-hand side of this data set, we have all of our metadata, including the columns, parties, and accession withdrawal that we discussed in Module 2. And I hope you remember that the difference between those two columns is that accession withdrawal column additionally provides information regarding the dates when a given party joined a given treaty, as well as the dates when a given party withdrew from a trade agreement. And if the party hasn't withdrawn from a given trade agreement, then in place of the second date, we have an A. Now let's take a look at the second type of downloadable datasets, which is the per treaty summary datasets. So here we can see that we analyze a total of 7 trade agreements. And again, in the first section of this dataset, we have all of the metadata. And on the right-hand side, over here, we have our indicators that were generated based on the mapping results. So as before, here we have total number of articles in a trade agreement. This column, titled Article with Prof, contains a number of unique articles that are found to contain at least one of the coded provision types or topics, excluding the ones that were labeled as other. This is essentially the number of unique articles that were found to contain both Tier 1 and Tier 2 keyword combinations. As you remember, articles that were marked as other are the ones that were only found to contain Tier 1 keyword combinations from certain row of the matching matrix. It means that they still include keyword combinations relevant to the broad targeted thematic area, but specific provision types or topics cannot be determined. And in this particular column over here, we calculated those articles into the indicator. So this column contains a number of unique articles that at least contains matches to Tier 1 keyword combinations. This number in this column would always be the same or higher than that in article with broad column. Then provision type and column contains number of unique coded provision types detected in trade agreement. It's based on articles that produce both Tier 1 and Tier 2 matches. The intention of this indicator is to provide insight into the complexity with which a targeted topic is addressed in a given treaty, whether, for example, a trade agreement has a simple mentioning of importance of digital trade, or whether it goes further to regulate digital trade in a number of specific ways. Then thematic area and column has a similar purpose as the previous indicator, but if you choose not to categorize broader thematic areas, these numbers can be ignored. Indicator in preamble column tells us whether Tier 1 keyword combinations were detected in the preamble. And lastly, we have on the right-hand side a set of columns titled after the coded provision types or topics. And each of those columns contain a number of unique articles that seem to address the coded provision types or topics. As was discussed in Module 2, for the summary dataset to be fully relevant, it is better to map the provision types that together fit into one broader theme or area of regulation. In the example that I showed to you just now, I had a matching matrix that was designed to detect different types of provisions regulating digital trade. The initial categorization of provisions and broader thematic areas I derived from researching literature on the topic. Then I worked with the texts of trade agreements to see the actual wordings of the relevant provisions, which I had to do outside of this tool, as at the time it wasn't available. And based on that research, I tried to come up with the sets of Tier 1 and Tier 2 keyword combinations that would help me detect the presence of provisions that I was interested in. With digital trade, it seems that, at least in recent years, the relevant provisions are formulated in quite a consistent way in terms of their categorization and in terms of the typical terms and phrases that are used. It is possible that not all topics may be mapped using this approach. Another caveat is that the mapping is done at the article level, and there are some articles in certain trade agreements that are quite long. So in this case, the accuracy of the two-tier mapping could be reduced. When mapping digital trade-related trade agreements, this approach, although not entirely error-free, but it worked quite well, as the relevant articles in recently adopted trade agreements tend to be quite short, and each dedicated to a narrow set of provisions. So we just reviewed a per treaty summary dataset, and as you remember, in addition to it, we can also download the same dataset, but have it further split up to have a per reporter presentation, or even a presentation that reflects bilateral relationships of the parties to the analyzed trade agreements.